extra copies if you can. I can make it a little bigger if that would help. Yes, no, maybe. Okay. So quick review from last week and from our screencast. So we have our legislature, whether state or federal, that enacts a law, and the generic name, remember, is session law, also sometimes called slip law. And in the federal world, which we focused on last week, that session law is called what? So I'm asking for your input here. Right here on the chart. Public law. Our hero from the screencast, the public law. And our hero of public law lives in which planets? And USCAN, the name, I'm not going to ask you what that stands for unless you ask me. Okay, so using what a friend of mine calls natural knowing, taking a look at the chart, what would a session law be called in New York? Chapter law. Does everybody see that? We're just going across. So a session law, federal is public law. In New York is called chapter law. Same concepts apply. The theme for today, at least for state statutes, is the same concepts apply. You already know 3/4 of what we're going to do today. It just looks a little different. The names have been changed, like chapter law is different than public law. You go to different states, they're going to be different names. Some states call them public acts. Some also call them chapter laws. Some call them public laws. There are all sorts of different names. Just have to kind of go with the flow. And you will find that chapter law lives in what planet? McKinney's, but fill in the full name. Okay. So, whether we're talking federal, our hero public law, or state chapter law, the power of the force comes in and gives us just the current laws in a subject arranged called a code. And in the federal end, that's known as, we talked a whole lot about it last week, our federal code is called U.S. Code. I promise you I don't do trick questions. I'll warn you when I do. How about that? Okay, so our natural knowing, moving across to the state, where are we going to find New York State Code? The current laws, subject arranged. McKinney's, well, no, not the session laws. Okay, we'll be looking much more closely at Print and McKinney's in just a few minutes, but just hold that concept in mind. Okay, so just by way of a little bit review, and interestingly, there were a number of people in the workshops that got this confused, so I want to go over that. So here on Lexis, we were looking at 2612. So for the workshop last time, we were looking at 2612, and I asked you 2 questions. I asked you, how recent is Lexis? When has Lexis, bless you, when has Lexis updated whatever it is we're looking at? So looking at the example from a workshop, when has Lexis updated this section? Or in other words, it is current through Public Law 114-114 as of, and the date here is just 12/28/15. Now, a number of people, and understandably, but I want to make sure you understand this concept. So this is when Lexis updated whatever it is we're looking at. So it is current through. That is very much different and distinguished from when the legislative body, in this case Congress, because we're looking at the U.S. Code, when the Congress updated this particular section. And that on Lexis is called history. So when was the last time, the last public law and date that Congress updated Section 2612? And the public law number? 111, 119. I see some of you squinting there. So I won't make you squint for too long. Okay, do you understand the difference between when Lexis updates and when the Congress updates? We'll see this in the state statutes as well. Like I said, today's theme is same concept applies. Okay, let's take a super quick look at Westlaw, because Westlaw does look quite a bit different. So let's take a look at the same section just by way of example, USCA 2612. Now Westlaw does it a little bit differently. Remember how Lexis had the current through right on top? We didn't have to put finger to keyboard. With Westlaw, you click on currentness to find out how current Westlaw is. So when did Westlaw last update this section? Let's see if I can make this a little bigger, but see, when I make it bigger, it jumps. There we go. Okay, so for when Westlaw, you want to look for when Westlaw or Lexis, you want to look for current through. Maybe that's a good way to distinguish. Westlaw and Lexis are telling you, hey, we last incorporated whatever changes the Congress voted on. We are current through. Actually, it makes sense, right? It's the same public law. Or not necessarily, but usually it'll be pretty close. So Westlaw is current through. When did the Congress last update this section? $111 makes sense. Now that's the one that makes sense. It's the same, right? Because Congress is still Congress, whether it's on Lexis or Westlaw. Right? So the last one is just the last one here in the list. 111-119, and here's the date, December 21, 2009. And super quickly on Bloomberg here. Good, I have it up. Bloomberg again, you can use that guide. Bloomberg tells you when Bloomberg is current through, and Bloomberg's actually a little more current than Lexis or Westlaw. I'm not sure it makes much difference because I doubt there were any changes. But Bloomberg's current through 114-118. So our public laws are now moving into 2016 because we've started the second session of Congress. Does this hopefully sound a little familiar? And again, to find when Congress last updated, you go down to the end of the section, and everybody calls it something different. So Lexis calls it history, Westlaw calls it credits, Bloomberg just doesn't call it anything. It just gives you the information at the bottom here. So again, the same information. Public Law 111-119, 2009. I will be distributing the next assignment at the end of the class. You will be asked this in the assignment. Make sure it makes sense now. If it doesn't make sense in a week or so when you're doing the assignment, come ask. Okay? All right. So, state statutes. So we've pretty much figured out that for HMO liability, we definitely have to figure out this whole federal ERISA question. In section 1144, I've referred a couple of times to 1132 because that has to do with civil enforcement, and we've seen that referenced in the secondary sources, and we're not quite sure what it is yet, but we need to read up on that. But remember also, we're in New York. We're not sure if we're going to be in federal court because we're preempted from state court, or maybe we will wind up in state court. Maybe we'll come up with a theory that allows us to stay in state court because we think we'll do better there. But we kind of should know what state law is, right? So this is one of those issues that can be both federal and state. Not every issue will be. In fact, most probably won't be, but there will be some, and you always want to keep that in mind. Okay, so we've kind of got a good start on federal. How do we find out if there is even a state statute? And then if there is one, if it exists, what it is? Best place to start when you don't know much about an issue? You just handed in an assignment in that area? Okay, yeah, Google is fine, but I don't need to teach you how to type in words in Google. So after you do Google and have exhausted Google, and actually, honestly, I sort of suspect for something as specific as New York State law, Google isn't going to be great. But definitely worth a try. Although I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time because you don't want to waste your time. So secondary sources. So can anybody think of one in particular that might be a really good place to start? Literature, excellent. You got a question, any attorney that walks into the library and has a question, I need to know about something in New York law. 8 times out of 10, I'm going to point them to New York jurisprudence. Always exceptions and whatnot. So I'm here on Westlaw just because we're going to wind up looking at Westlaw for a while, but it is on Lexis, so let's go to New York jurisprudence. And sometimes I like to do a general search and then narrow down after the search, but when I know I want New York jur, I just want New York jur. So I'm going to plug in our easy search terms, mostly because it's easy to type. Okay, bless you. Now, turns out our New York jur search pulls up the section. Does anybody remember this section? Our very first workshop, those of you that were assigned to New York jur ultimately came up with this section using the good old-fashioned index in New York jur. So Westlaw pulled it up for us as well. So of course we take a look. Know if you can kind of see it. There's a highlighted section. So in reading my New York jur, I read, each member, employee, agent of the organization or plan may be fully and personally liable. Possible theory of liability, right? Personally liable and accountable for any negligent or wrongful act, misconduct committed by him or her or any person under his direct supervision and control while rendering professional services on behalf of the organization or plan. So, that person working for the plan could be liable. How interesting. And one of the main reasons we love secondary sources is footnotes. And what does footnote 2 tell us? Pub Health Law 4410, open paren 1. So our secondary source is doing what it's supposed to and giving us a citation to a primary source, in this case, state statutes. Now, of course, I'm going to want to read the whole section. I obviously jump to that sentence. So here we are in McKinney's. McKinney's is the New York Code, one of the 2 New York codes, actually. New York is one of those states, and there are several of them, that do not have an officially published code. That is, New York, the state of New York, the government, does not publish a code the way the federal government publishes the U.S. code. We have 2 commercially published state codes. There's McKinney's, which is pretty much how everybody refers to it, is just McKinney's. Any attorney, New York attorney that you will speak to will just refer to it as McKinney's pretty much. And when that New York attorney does refer to McKinney's, they are referring to the code. And you'll notice back in the sources, I referred to it as the black volumes, because when you go to, if you still are using the print, and I grant you, you may not be, when you go to the shelf, all you'll see, you won't even see McKinney's on the spine. I'll pass this around so you can see. And what you'll see is the public health law. But you'll know it's the McKinney's Code because it's the black volumes. And if you do look at the front, it does say McKinney's Consolidated Laws. So I'll pass that around. What confuses a whole lot of people, mostly students, but occasionally an attorney or two, is that if you look at McKinney's session laws, remember McKinney's session laws is where we find our chapter law, the session law as it was passed by the legislature, not the current law as it exists today. In the McKinney session laws, it actually says McKinney's on the spine. So a lot of people go to the red McKinney's session laws looking for the code, the law as it exists today. Do not mistake the two if you find yourself having to use the print. For purposes of what we're doing, Westlaw, Lexis is fine. So we'll talk about the version on Lexis in a moment. Actually, I'll pass this around the same slide so you can compare and contrast. And the reason I belabor this point is that it has just confused a lot of people that I've helped at the reference desk. So I wanted to avoid you all being confused by the same, again, if you wind up using the print version of McKinney's. Okay, so let's dive into some substance of McKinney's, and we're going to do the same thing we did last time. And we're going to compare McKinney's online. McKinney's is published by West, so it's on Westlaw. And we're going to look at it online and compare it to McKinney's in print, which is wandering around. And also I've, again, copied the pages for a handout in what I call the walkthrough. This Advanced Legal Research Statutes Part 2 State. So on page 1, we just see the title page, so you can see the volume we're looking at. And let's actually jump ahead momentarily to page 3. Where we will see our section 4410 that we got referred to by New York Jur. And again, up here on Westlaw, we also see 4410. And the main thing I want to point out is on Westlaw, and as we'll see momentarily on Lexis, you owe, especially when you're getting just a single reference from a secondary source or wherever you're getting the single statutory reference, look at the table of contents. You don't know that this is the only section. You don't know that this is the best section. Because it's a code, because it's arranged by subject, the other sections around your section will probably be on the same subject and may certainly be of interest. So just like we did federal, we're going to take a look at the table of contents. And looks like there's not much after 4410. But looking before 4410, I scroll up and reading through, I see, look at that, 4406, Health Maintenance Organizations Regulation of Contracts. I'm not sure if regulation of contracts is going to apply to us or not, but it's health maintenance organizations. I'm going to look at that section. I would be remiss if I did not look at that section and determine whether or not it is actually relevant. So here's a good example where the table of contents really helps us out. Back in the print, on page 3, looking at our section 4410, the way I would find the table of contents in print, not as easy, unfortunately, I would look up at the top and it would tell me, okay, section 4410 is in Article 44, not a big surprise, 4410, Article 44, there is a logic there. And I would just flip back in the book to the beginning of Article 44, which I see on page 2 of the handout. And you see a handy-dandy arrow pointing out. You would see it in print just as we did online at 4406. Is definitely worth checking out and might be relevant. Okay. So let's, while we're in the handout looking in print, turning to page 4, we see the end of section 4410. So who can tell me what law first enacted section 4410? Okay, so can you guess what C might stand for? Chapter. Okay, remember in our chart, chapter law is the session law, and L does stand for laws. 1976 is the year. Exactly. So our section 4410 was first enacted in 1976 by chapter 938, actually section 1 of 938. Then it makes it very clear it was amended again by laws in 1993. What chapter? 538, section 6. And then we see that all-important punctuation symbol. So what do? Deep breath. Excellent. And then we say, and amended by? All together now? Amended by. I know it's silly, but I want you to get used to it. And then, so what's the next amendment? You interpret it for me. Exactly. And the last one to amend it, this section, you just, that was it. Yeah, exactly. Okay. No, absolutely not. Just a very easy one. Really? You're going to equate a really easy question with a trick question? Okay, so look, excellent. So looking at the handout on page 4, we then see our annotated code features. We start to see some more review journal commentaries. And turning the page, we see more research references on page 5. And of course, we see our wondrous notes of decisions, because the annotated code is our best friend. Here on Westlaw. Okay, again, remember the difference between currentness when Westlaw updated this section and what Westlaw calls the credits, what we all just read and interpreted. Looks exactly the same. Okay, and we also, question? So again, and we have, again, same concepts apply. We have our context and analysis, so we can see law reviews and commentaries. Actually, I'll click on that. So notice we have 21 different possibilities. We have a bunch of law review articles, a few ALRs, some encyclopedias, some treatises, to help us understand how this law applies. Now, a bunch of you had questions last time, the difference between context analysis and citing references. Context and analysis, again, are going to be articles, encyclopedia, everything that's listed here about our section. So it's going to give us some background. See, look, you can look at the HMO liability part 2, liability health maintenance organizations. The citing references are just, and notice there's so many more, and it's not just cases. There are a lot more others as well. You can see the numbers. The citing references just cite to our section. Just somewhere in the text, you'll see New York Public Law 4410. Now, that's not a bad resource to have. It's going to be most useful with regard to cases, which we'll talk about later on. The best use in terms of using it when we're looking at statutes is the question, I think it was Danielle who asked, can we narrow our notes of decisions by court? So looking at notes of decisions, these again are cases about that interpret our section. And they're not that many here, so you could just read through these without too much time. But remember, in 1144, there were hundreds of cases. You don't even want to read through hundreds of two-sentence annotations of cases because it would take a long time. It would be a waste of time. So if you really wanted to narrow by court, you would go to citing references, and that would allow you to narrow by court. So again, context and analysis, notes and decisions specific to our section, citing references, just mention it. Any questions? Okay, so let's go back to our handout for a moment. So we see our notes of decisions. So we turn to page 6. So when we're looking at our handout, or we're more importantly looking, if we do find that we need to look in print McKinney's for whatever reason, we've looked through it and we saw notes of decisions in the volume. Are we done? How many say we're done? How many say we're not done? Yay, why aren't we done? Pocket parts, update, update, update. And true online, that's what I'm telling you about when, with regard to looking at currentness. You want to see when Westlaw or Lexis updated. But probably more important on Westlaw, and we'll look at the pocket part in a moment, but since I'm talking about updating and updating on Westlaw, more important on Westlaw is you just want to be our theme, bibliographic awareness. You just want to know what you're looking at the screen and notice, oh, look, there's a yellow flag. I should be cautious, just like the yellow light. And what that yellow flag is telling us is proposed legislation. Now, if something is proposed, it means it hasn't gotten through the legislature yet, so it's not law. So in terms of worrying about, am I up to date? You are. This is what the law is in the code. If that said enacted legislation, and it's very rare that it will because Westlaw and Lexis and even Bloomberg are very good about incorporating changes pretty quickly. But there could be a week or two span of time where they just haven't incorporated a new law that's been enacted yet. So you just want to check that real quick, say, okay, proposed legislation. The other reason you want to check that is make sure, because the other thing that can change the status, whether your law is still, your statute, your code section is still good law, is a case can invalidate it, right? It can be held unconstitutional. That can happen at the state level as well as the federal level. And again, that's what these flags are so good about. So remember to update, update, and update whether you are in print or online. Online, it's super easy. After looking at a flag, proposed legislation, okay, I'm good. That was, what, 10 seconds? In print, back to our handout, page 6. So we need, as Brandon said, to check the good old pocket part. So again, sometimes your pocket part will indeed be a part in the pocket, as they say. And again, you just check, as we see on the handout, for your section. So turning to page 7, that's the front. And interestingly, McKinney's in print no longer tells us how up to date when the pocket part was printed. So I don't know if it's up to date through the end of 2015, through mid-2015. All I see is 2016 pocket part. You can't really see the copy of the library stamp, but that's not especially informative. As I said, if we get a replacement pocket part because the old one got lost, we're going to stamp it with the day we receive it, even though the pocket part is 8 months old. So we don't know. Sometimes the answer to update and update and update is, I can't tell. So turning the page. So what we see on page 8 is for 4410, right after the number 4410, we see health maintenance organizations, professional services, then we see jumps right to research preferences. There's no text there. That's telling me, okay, there's been no changes that are in this pocket part. So what I read in the main volume is the most up-to-date. What the pocket part is giving me are changes, updated research references. So I'm seeing actually New York Jur. What we would have seen in the main volume is they cited to a different New York Jur section because New York Jur renumbered. Basically, you get updated research references, updated secondary sources, newer ones, and then turning the page. Turning the page on page 9, I'm just showing you section 4406. Remember, that's the one we wanted to check out because it might be relevant. I wanted you to see what it looked like in print when there was a change to the text. So if you're looking at a pocket part and you see the section number and then you see text, that means, oh, okay, that's the most up-to-date text, at least that I can identify in print. These days, you will want to find a way to go online if you can. I think probably most organizations will have some access to either Lexis or Westlaw or Bloomberg, which will, as I mentioned, will incorporate changes. Okay, any questions about updating, and updating? Okay, before we look at Lexis and Bloomberg quickly, I wanted to mention the index and popular names table in print. Well, actually online too. Let's look online first and then I'll go in print. So remember, who can tell me what a popular name table is good for? The name kind of gives it away. No trick question, just an easy one. Chelsea. Okay, perfect. Can someone else give us an example of a popular name of a statute that they know? Any popular name? I'm not sure, that is, you're right, but I'm not sure that would appear because its name is the Affordable Care Act. That's a good question, though. I don't know if Obamacare would show up. How about ERISA? How about Civil Rights Act? So on Westlaw, you actually will find the popular name table. You will not, for McKinney's. A couple of ways you can do it. Actually, I probably just did it the harder way here. Type in popular name. What it does is it brings up what I think is honestly a rather random list of states' popular names table. So best if you are looking for a state, just type in a name and then Westlaw pulls it up. Or you can just navigate to get rid of that, you can just navigate to New York statutes. And I'm doing this for a reason because to remind you when you do navigate to the page on statute, you get a bunch of different other useful tools and resources, as Westlaw calls it. Popular name is one. Looks like it's cut off a little bit on the screen, but you can kind of figure it out. The index is the other. In print, and actually we have on page 10, basically for print indexes, you need to remember, and again, I don't know how much you'll ever use this, but you need to remember that the popular name table is in the last volume of the index. So you pull out the index that has the letter Z, and the popular name table will just be after the letter Z. So we don't see that in the handout. What we see on page 11 is just a reminder. When you do use a print index, and you can't really see it, so I'll pass this around and just open to a page and look. You're going to get references to all sorts of funky abbreviations, at least in New York, because we name our codes. And you can see on page 11, when you find a bunch of funky abbreviations, and this is probably true for any resource, not just a popular name table or an index, look in the front of the book, and it should give you a table of abbreviations to tell you what that funky abbreviation means. Now, a lot of times you can figure it out. Pub Health, obviously, but you look at some of these, you might not know what EPTL is unless you've taken wills and trusts. Gen A, Gen B, Gen C, I certainly am not going to remember all of that, so I'm going to want to look it up. Some states, as we will see when we do our workshop in a little while, some states number their codes or organize their codes differently. So some are all numbers, like the USCA is 48 USCA whatever, or 29 USCA 1144. Some states have a whole funky numbering system. You just have to kind of work it out and basically figure it out depending on the state. And obviously, if you're practicing in the state, you'll get used to it. I think all of you plan on practicing in New York, so you'll get used to our named codes with the funky abbreviations. Okay. Questions? Let's move on to Lexis, just to take a quick look. And just go to the top. And actually, what was the date you were saying you were selling the Lexis.com? The end of the year. Oh. Okay, so the thing on Lexis, actually, I'm just going to go back here to the beginning, or the front, what's called the landing page. So Lexis Lexis looks a little bit different. And what I'm going to do, I wanted to show you because it can be a little bit not intuitive. So if you're looking for state statutes, yes, you can narrow it ahead of time, or pre-search, I should say. If you choose not to, you do your search, you might first narrow by statutes. The thing you need to know on Lexis is that if you don't narrow ahead of time, once you narrow to statutes, notice we're getting bill text, congressional record, we get a New Jersey statute, we haven't narrowed by jurisdiction yet. You need to know on Lexis to narrow by codes. And again, it doesn't matter what order you do it in. If you narrow to New York first by jurisdiction and then narrow by statutes, that's fine too. Whatever works. And then once you narrow, as long as you've narrowed to codes at some point, you can finish the process however you choose to. So I'm finishing up by narrowing to New York. Now notice I did the same search HMO liability and I narrowed my way down to New York codes. The first thing you'll notice is New York CLS. That is the other unofficial code in New York. Most people don't use it, but if you do see the reference, you should know what it is. And that's essentially the old Coke and Pepsi. So McKinney's is what most attorneys use. They just refer to the New York code as McKinney's. But Lexis also publishes a New York code, and it's called CLS, Consolidated Laws Service. And this is what it looks like. And this, our particular volume with our particular Public Health 4410, again, knowing to update, the pocket part got too fat, so you needed to find a soft-bound supplement. I'll pass around CLS, so you've touched it once in your life, you may not touch it again. Because if you're going to CLS, it's probably because you're on Lexis. So here on Lexis, notice we're not seeing the section right away. And this is an example of what we've talked about a little bit with statutes in any jurisdiction, that they use what's called a controlled vocabulary, very specific terminology. So unless you know that terminology in advance, a term search may or may not pull it up. Again, just reinforcing why secondary sources can be so useful. Remember, we got that secondary source reference, the statutory reference to section 4410 from a secondary source from New York Jur. Finding it, doing a term search on Lexis would take us a whole lot longer. Or Westlaw, probably. Okay. Any questions? So, to find a section on Lexis, if you already know the citation, because we'll pull up, law 4410, can sometimes be a little tricky. If I didn't type in the word law, Lexis would just run a term search and I would have to just go through my results to find it. Because I put in the word law, it should pull it up. Yay. Okay. Lexis is trying to make that easier to find. So if you happen to remember CLS is on Lexis, you can pull it up. New York CLS Public Health 4410. But if you can remember just to put in the word law, that's probably the best habit to get into, then it should come right up. And again, same concept applies. We have our annotated code. Looks a little different on Lexis. We can go to our history to find out when our act was last amended by the New York legislature. We can go on Lexis up at the top to find out when it was last updated on Lexis. And we have all of the other annotated code features, the research and references, some secondary sources to help us understand the law. And notice there are actually a couple that look like they could be promising. Understanding liability of HMOs and other organizations. Not quite sure why they have that listed twice, but it should be useful either way. Also in our wonderful friend, the annotated code, we have those wonderful notes to decisions. And it jumped right in there, but so there you see the various notes to decisions available on Lexis. Any questions? And of course, as we've been saying in print, to check the pocket part, to update on Lexis. To do so, again, you just look for the Shepherd's signal. Not surprisingly, we see pending legislation. As we know, if it's pending, nothing's happened to it yet, so we're not especially worried. But let's now dive into the citator to see what it will do for us. So again, Shepherds, just like citing references, will tell us where our section was mentioned somewhere else. So again, not specific about our subject, just where 4410 was cited. So the whole bunch of cases. So again, we could narrow our cases by jurisdiction if we wanted. Our other citing sources will tell us other research references, other secondary sources. And what Shepherds does for us that we don't get on Westlaw is we get this subsection report by specific court citation. What on earth does that mean? I can't show you what on earth that means in section 4410 because there aren't any. So I'm just going to pull up our friend 1144 and hopefully it will make more sense. Here we go. So 1144, Shepherdize this document. And although again, same concept applies, but this time if I click on subsection reports, what you see are the different subsections of 1144. There wasn't anything in 4410 that was different, didn't cover the different subsections. So what this is telling me is that if you want cases that cite to a specific subsection, for those of you interested in tax, as you know, the tax code, there are bazillion subsections, and you sometimes really only want to see cases to that particular subsection. You don't really care about the rest of it. Well, you can do that on Shepherds. You cannot do that on Westlaw, Keysight, or Bloomberg. So, useful to know. Okay, quickly on Bloomberg, if it cooperates. So again, finding a statute, I would put in New York Public Health Law 4410. And if Bloomberg's cooperating, it would give us a drop down. I'm not going to wait for it. I'm just going to, I have it already open. I cheated a little because I know Bloomberg's a little sketchy these days. Same concept sort of applies with Bloomberg in that Bloomberg just isn't as robust, I think is the tech term. There isn't as much on Bloomberg. So we have the case analysis where we get the list of cases. We have the current through, so it tells us when Bloomberg was last updated. We could scroll down to the end of the section and find out, well, actually on Bloomberg for state laws, for some reason, they don't include the what chapters enacted. And again, so another example of why Bloomberg isn't quite caught up to Lexis and Westlaw. And in terms of our annotated code, the one feature Bloomberg has is the case analysis. Some of you on the workshop asked about the topics. You'll find the topics here on the left. So you can narrow your Bloomberg case analysis by topic here. So I wanted to cover that with you. Okay. And on Westlaw, we kind of already went over, the annotated code already. The one little feature I haven't shown you is how to find a statute by cite on Westlaw. And actually, we were already there, but I'll start over again. There's a nice little trick on Westlaw. If you type in your state and the word code, it'll bring you to the screen, statutes. So whatever state you have, New York, New Jersey, Wyoming, you name it. You type in the state or the state abbreviation. It brings you to the screen where it gives you the listing of the titles. And what you see here is this find template. Now you could type in New York Public Health Law 4410 and pull it up. Or sometimes you don't even know, especially if it's a strange state like Wyoming, I don't even know their numbering system. So Westlaw has this nice template. If you remember, it's not, I find it very useful, like I said, when I'm using a strange state. I have no idea what the numbering system is. If I go to the template, I can just fill it in. So here in New York, that we've got all these funky names, I can fill it in and go down to public health. Put in 4410, and voila. As I said, we already talked about updating on Westlaw, using the key cite flag, using the citing, really using the key cite flag, and looking at citing references. Any questions about updating on the different systems? Bloomberg really doesn't have, Bloomberg has what's called B-Site, but that's for cases, so they don't really have that for statutes yet. So again, Bloomberg is a little bit behind. Okay, so why don't we apply what we've just done. We're going to hike down to the library, down to the state statutes, which are all the way downstairs, so we'll just all go in. Requires a little bit of, well, not getting up quite yet, requires a little bit of explanation. I'm going to pass around the workshops. Because you're a big group and we only have 4 states in print, I've had to divide you up into 2 different topics. One is our HMO topic, and the other is a totally different topic that's going to be in totally different volumes. So there's going to be 2 sets of you in each state. One's going to be looking at HMO, one's going to be looking at air pollution. And you'll see I've checked off the state, and you'll see up top what the topic is. So while we're up here, for those of you who get the HMO question, I'm going to ask you to use your state statutes index to find what your state legislature has to say. I'm reading off the workshop about HMOs, also known as health maintenance organizations, denial of coverage or claims. So what are the terms you're going to look at in the index? So even if you don't have it yet, it's a good issue spotting exercise. So what does your state legislature say about HMOs, denial of coverage or claims? I promise you're not a good question. Terms? What would be the first place you'd start? Okay, and then what else? Let's go to that one next. We'll do the air pollution one next. For the HMO groups. It's right on the sheet. Denial. Coverage. Okay. Air pollution. There you go. See, imagine that. No trick question. You're learning. Excellent, excellent. Okay. So air pollution. Find what the legislature has to say about air pollution standards for motor vehicles. I heard something. Louder for the group, whoever mumbled. or someone else fill in, help us out?
I was saying motor vehicles.
Okay, motor vehicles. That's up. And what else? Standards, yeah. Okay. Okay. So everybody understand where they're going to start? You should be in groups of 2 or 3. I will be floating around. Don't hesitate if you have any questions. If you find that you need a volume that someone else has, come find me. I tried to design it that you wouldn't, but there's one circumstance where you might, so we'll work around it. Oh, and, well, that's okay. I won't go any further than that. Let's go down. See what we can do. Kudos to those of you who fought through California. That was a little bit confusing. Any questions overall? I know some of you didn't find ALR treatises. That's going to happen in any given situation for state, federal. You won't always find any particular type of resource. Obviously, for purposes of the course, I'm asking you to look, but in real life, you just want to find something that's useful that's going to help you explain whatever the section is. So it doesn't really matter what type of resource. So any questions? Okay, so let's continue on our investigation of state statutes. The one area that isn't really same concept is there might be instances where you need to find what several states or all of the states say on a particular issue. And I can tell you that this is a long time ago while the earth was still cooling and I was practicing law. I got assigned to find all of the, actually it was regulations, but same idea, on underground storage tanks. And remember it, you can tell how much of an impression that made, how long ago. Yes?
Are you being recorded?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
However, it isn't on the screen because the thing turned off.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see if that turns on. Actually, the recording will be fine because it's recording what's on my laptop screen. However, I do want you all to be able to see the screen also. Let's see if that works. So anyway, I needed to find all the 50 state statutes on underground storage tanks. And this was, as I mentioned, a very long time ago, so Lexis and Westlaw existed, so I probably could have done it, but honestly, my firm was not at all happy with me using Lexis or Westlaw, so I trundled on down to the local law library, actually university library, and I went through all 50 state statutes. It took me days. Thankfully for you folks, the earth has since cooled, and you can go on to online, and you can go to one of several places. If you have Lexis, and you want to make sure that this is part of your contract, because this is one area online that will charge you tons of money if it isn't part of your contract. So, if you have Lexis and it is part of your contract, you can type in, if you remember it exists, and yes, you do have to remember it exists, 50 state, and you see LexisNexis 50 state surveys, statutes, and regs. Table of contents, and you would choose your subjects. So let's go to healthcare. And let's just go to healthcare litigation, just so you can see what it looks like. And I know ours isn't really medical malpractice actions. You're not going to find a survey on every topic imaginable, but if you are lucky and find it on yours, and no, I never did go to look to see if they had underground storage tanks, if this would have helped me. But I certainly would have checked first before I went through all 50 states for the better part of the week. And just to give you a sense of what this concept is, basically it lists each state that has a law on whatever topic it is we're talking about, and it gives you citations to that. You can print this out, you can download it, you can just click to the links. So again, if you get such a assignment or project, remember that these exist. These also exist on Westlaw. Same caveat applies in terms of expense. Again, typing in 50 state statutes, and it works the same. You go to your particular topic, you click on it. It'll look a little different because it's on Westlaw. If you had both available, if you were, say, you have a research project for class while you're still here in law school, I prefer the Lexis because I think their topics, they have more topics. But Westlaw here works as well. I'll just click real quickly, see if we can pull it up so you can see it. Come on, Westlaw. And a little less detail, but again, you can see all the links to Alabama and Alaska and scrolling down, etc. One other source that's a little more difficult to remember, but possibly more likely to be available to you once you no longer are in law school, is Hein Online. You may not have Hein Online available wherever you are working, but again, any of your local law schools, and you're always welcome to come back here, of course, probably does have Hein Online. And because Hein Online is a flat fee, we will be able to, like if you come back as alum or if you go to another school and you're allowed to use it, allowed to use their library, you will probably be able to access Hein Online. We've already looked at Hein Online for the Law Journal Library. We looked briefly at the U.S. Code. There's also something called Subject Compilation of State Laws, which is a long way of saying 50 state statute surveys. You go to their database, and of course, because we're remote, I have to log in. And we just do a keyword search. Now, Hein Online does this a little bit differently in that it doesn't give you the states and their laws, which honestly I think is much nicer. So I could see where Lexis and Westlaw would be preferable if you had that kind of assignment like I got. It gives you references to law review articles or treatises or other sorts of resources that will give you references to the states themselves. So here's a law review article in the Connecticut Law Review that's going to give you references to the different states' codes. I think not as useful as the Lexis and Westlaw, or not as direct as the Lexis and Westlaw, but still could be very useful. And as I said, if Lexis and Westlaw aren't available to you and you can go somewhere that has Hein Online, you can at least check it out. And again, this is a tool in your toolbox that you won't use very frequently. But if you do get one of those crazy projects like I did, and you do find a 50-state survey, it will save you eons and eons of work. So just throw it out there for you as a tool. Another resource for state laws that you have encountered, and you may encounter, although I couldn't tell you in what context and practice, is uniform laws. You've all encountered uniform laws when you talked about the model penal code in criminal law, right? You all remember the model penal code discussion. That is an example of a uniform law. A group of experts, lawyers, law professors, other experts in the field, if there are any, got together and decided, you know, it really would be good if the states got together and weren't so different, each state having a different role. So they got together and created this model penal code, and they say, okay, look, states, here's what we think as expert in this field makes the most sense for your laws to reflect, your penal laws to reflect. Some states adopted some parts, some states adopted others, some didn't at all, some adopted the whole thing. Some of you were looking at the Uniform Commercial Code just for our workshop before. That's another example of a uniform law. You will find the uniform laws in a couple of different places. Some of you, again, who are on journals, have had to find uniform laws in print because you need the print and not the online. So we've directed you, reference librarians have directed you to a set called Uniform Laws Annotated. I know those of you in Tech, at least for some years, have had to find the Uniform Probate Code. So this uniform laws annotated pulls together all these different uniform laws in one set. Uniform Laws Annotated is published by West. The reason you care is that you will find it on West Law. This isn't the print version. Going back to Westlaw. Whoops. A sec. Again, same way we find everything on Lexis and Westlaw. Just type it in. Uniform Laws. And wait, I had it there a second ago. Uniform Laws Annotated. And you can see there are a whole bunch of this. Uniform Commercial Code, as I just mentioned. There's sorts of business and nonprofit. There's Partnership Act. There's also family. There are a whole bunch of acts in family law. Estate probate. So we find the probate code, of course. Family, as I mentioned. Criminal law. So you find that on Westlaw. If, for whatever reason, you don't have Westlaw available and you need to track down what these uniform laws look like, most of the uniform laws are put together by the Uniform Law Commission, or this is the body that these experts belong to that draft these uniform laws. So this is just a website, and to take a look at some of the acts. And actually, the nice thing about this website is that it does have the PDFs for those of you on journals. So you can find an act. Let's actually just go to the acts. You can see it just starting with A. You can see just the wide range. And the nice thing about this website, Uniform Laws Annotated in print or on Westlaw, is that it not only tells you what the uniform law was, but it will give you a chart to tell you which states adopted the uniform law. So, for instance, if we were interested in the Uniform Probate Code, search for probate. Take a look at the probate code, and it gives you this funky little map. In the print and on Westlaw, it will give you a chart, but anyway, same information to let you know. So the sort of whatever color that is, lavender-ish, tells you which states enacted, and there are a couple of states that introduced it this year. Well, there may be states that introduced it this year. It doesn't look like it on this chart because you would see sort of a light bluish. So the rest of these states have not. So that's what the uniform laws are. Again, just the general concept. Probably you would need it most if you saw a reference to it somewhere outside of whatever work you do for journals. Any questions? So it might be that you need to find statutes, but you may, as I've been suggesting, you may or may not have Lexis or Westlaw available. Again, it's very expensive. More likely you'll be in an organization practicing, and if you all stay in New York as indicated, you'll be able to find New York state statutes okay. Hopefully you'll have access on Lexis or Westlaw to federal because your contract will include it. But you probably won't have access to other state statutes because that would cost a whole lot more money to be part of your contract, and if you don't really need it, why pay for it? So that's where you might want to be able to take a look at the statutes online. Now, of course, you won't have your best friend, the annotated code, available to you online, but you can find the state's codes. And obviously, Google is going to be probably the quickest and easiest way. But there may be times where you're not finding it on Google. So I'm just going to go over quickly where you might find online elsewhere. And again, you can Google to get to these sites as well. And also just some concepts to think about when you are using these codes online. So first, let's look at the federal code, the U.S. code. We mentioned it's on Hein Online, so again, if you are at a library, you have it available in your organization, you can look at it Hein Online. Somebody asked in the screencast questions how up to date it is. Hein Online is pretty up as up to date as the U.S. Code is, but as we discovered, the U.S. Code is about a year or so behind. So we have the Government Publishing Office, formerly known as the Government Printing Office, and their online system is called FedSys. However, as we've been talking about just today, these online systems change. So just as we discovered Lexis.com is going away, we discovered Lexis made some changes, Westlaw made some changes, FedSys, which has been around for a few years, is migrating to something new called GovInfo. We'll take a quick look at GovInfo. GovInfo is very much in beta, so for now, at least for our purposes, we'll be using FedSys. You can actually Google FDSYS and pull it up. Also, these links that I'm showing you, including the Uniform Laws Annotated, are all on our course website under Class Web Links and in the folder Statutes. So here on FedSys, we can browse the U.S. Code. And one reason we would want to browse the U.S. Code briefly is because one thing you want to do when you're looking at any statutes on the web is, of course, to find out how up-to-date it is. I've been mentioning Hein Online is about a year old. When you go on Hein Online, it's pretty clear what the year is. Here on FedSys, you actually have to look at the U.S. Code, and we see that 2014 is the most up-to-date. Because what happens if we want to search the U.S. Code, again, if for whatever reason we can't do it on Lexis and Westlaw, hopefully you can, you could search from this screen here, just throw in your search terms, but notice, again, bibliographic awareness, we're searching government publications generally. So we're searching thousands and thousands of, well, maybe not thousands and thousands of titles, but hundreds and hundreds of titles, when all we want is just one, the U.S. Code. So one of the strategies I like to use when using any website that I know I need to search is to check out the advanced search. And it'll look a little bit differently, but it's usually in the advanced search, they'll give you some tool to tell the website, I just want to search this one little portion of it. So I just want to search the U.S. Code. I'm going to add it there. And I just want to search it for health maintenance organizations and liability. I'm going to copy that so I don't have to type it again. And of course, searching the U.S. Code for our terms, as we discovered when we're searching state statutes, isn't going to give us the best results in terms of relevance. So this is not a strategy I would recommend as our first choice. But if it's the only thing available to you, then it's the only thing available to you. And as you can see, it's not exactly easy to read. I'm just going to click on this first section because one of my other complaints about this is it gives me no information. I don't know how up-to-date this is. That's why I had to go look at the U.S. Code before I did the search to see how up-to-date it is on FedSys. So this is a classic example of you get what you pay for. You get the very basic bare bones. You don't have your friendly annotated code, no notes of decisions, no research references. You don't even know how up-to-date this is unless you know to check elsewhere on the site. But it is free, and there's a lot to be said for that. Quickly looking at GovInfo, this beta site, and it is very much still in beta. Again, we talked a little bit, one of the things I want to talk about across the semester is how to investigate new websites. There are always going to be new websites, either ones like this that are updated from old ones, or ones that hadn't existed before. So I might try just searching. Again, I like to go to the advanced search, and as predicted, the advanced search, whoops, will let me choose what parts to search, so I can do the same thing with US Code. See what happens on GovInfo. Kind of, not surprisingly, the same results. Actually, it does give me the dates, so that's an improvement. Hooray. But again, pretty bare bones. In fact, I'm not even seeing where the link is. Oh, there we go. I have to click on PDF, but you get the idea. I will be asking you in the assignment to take a look at free websites. You're welcome to try GovInfo. I suggest you stick with FedSys again because GovInfo is very much a work in progress. You can even see beta release right over there. Okay. In terms of finding, there's one other site that actually there are a couple of other what are called legal portals, place where you can jump off and find a whole bunch of legal stuff. There are two of the big ones, Legal Information Institute and FindLaw. Anybody know of either of those? Use either of those? I see some heads. Yes, no, maybe. I like Legal Information Institute a little bit better than FindLaw, but FindLaw works for you, that's fine. With the LII, pretty much can go to law by jurisdiction. You actually see uniform laws. You can see it at LII too. And so federal law, and I could actually Google LII US code and it would get me straight there. Or we could do it the old-fashioned browse way. Interestingly, the LII used to have a better search than it does now. So they might go down in my estimation a little bit. And I'm telling you my impressions because this is what I mean when I ask you for analysis. Not so much that you remember the LII from however many years ago, but looking at LII, it's like, okay, this is good. But do they tell me how up to date it is? How easy is it to search? I can get to a title and section easily enough. If I know where I want to go, I could search all of LII and then narrow to US code. I could also remember one of my favorite Google tricks, is the site search. Let's just type in and so you can see the same web address, law.cornell.edu. And what I like about LII, again, more of this analysis, current through Public Law 114-38. Link to public laws for the current Congress, so I could see all the other public laws. So LII gets high marks on the telling me how up to date it is. Yeah, the searching was so-so. Again, here's a search box, but that's not just for the US code, and at least at this point, I don't see the opportunity for an advanced search to narrow it to the US code. So it's doable, but not the greatest. And as I said, FindLaw is also available. The other thing I just like about LII is it's just one-stop shopping. So here's Get the Law. We already looked by jurisdiction for federal. I tend to come here for state, again, just because it's one place and I can find whatever state I'm looking for. Yes, I can Google Hawaii code or whatever state it is, but honestly, sometimes to Google that and have to look through all the results, I find that I know I'm going to find it here. It's just easier. Whatever works for you. So I can go to listing by jurisdiction, and let's go to New York because and one reason you'd want to do this, as I mentioned, is if you need to not spend a lot of money. Like I said, if you needed to see the Hawaii code and it was not in your contract. We'll take a look at New York just so you can see what the New York code looks like online. So here's New York statutes. And what it does, because the New York legislature isn't in session yet, is you see Senate session has adjourned, Assembly session has adjourned. You would have to know to click on Laws of New York. And by the way, when I Googled earlier, and again, it depends on what terms you turned in, you type in, I got the same results where I got to that page where it said adjourned, and I still had to know to click on laws. So Google isn't perfect either. So again, here I see the laws of New York. Looks like it's fairly searchable. Let's see if how it does. I don't have an advanced search. I can limit to various titles, but let's see what it does for us. Not the prettiest of results, and by not the prettiest, I mean it's kind of hard to read. I mean, I don't really need pretty pictures, but it'd be nice if it was easier to read. Interestingly, the section we know doesn't come up, and that really isn't very pretty. And the other thing, more important than even just not easy to read, is again, no updating information. We didn't see it on this screen. If we go back, another aspect of analysis, especially for free website, is how easy is it to navigate. We now hopefully are all convinced that whenever we look at statutes, we want to look at the table of contents for our section. So just getting to our section takes a little bit of work. We know it's, at least they're giving us the number ranges in here as I scroll down to 4410. Still not there yet, but almost. So there we go. Article 44, not surprisingly. And actually, I just go to 4406. So it took me a little while to get to that table of contents. So again, it's there. But again, we get what we pay for. And again, certainly we don't have all of the wonderful features of the annotated code. Notes of decisions, research references, etc. Any question on state or federal statutes on the web? Okay. What I would like to do now, we have pretty much gone over everything that we will discuss having to do with statutes. So I'm going to review, because I put in a whole lot in the last couple of classes, and make sure, as promised, I answer any of the outstanding questions you had from the screencast, and then we'll go over assignment 2. So let's start back in the beginning, or go back and start where we started in the beginning. So what I thought might be interesting is looking at our sources handout and looking at your screencast questions, seeing if we can now answer them now that we've had a more in-depth look. And of course, when you looked at the screencast and you weren't already distracted by wondering what Yoda had anything to do with legal research, you, at least at the screencast, didn't have the in-depth look that we've had. So one of the questions was, where do we find the most current laws? So for federal, that would be, and for New York, that would be the Kinney's black volumes if you're in print. Okay, should we always refer to the United States Code because it's the most current? I would say yes, but, and you had no way of knowing this in the screencast, so I'm not, yes, but you'd actually want to go to the annotated code. Remember, the U.S. Code, the official, whether it's FedSys or Hein Online or print, is at least a year behind. So go to the annotated code, preferably on Lexis or Westlaw. Okay, here, this wasn't a question asked in the screencast, but I'm going to jump in and see if I can come up. So here we are at the class web links. I'm going to go to statutes. And I'm going to go to our table 3 tool. And I'm going to navigate. And with our table 3 tool, remember, we need to know the public law number. So our public law number for ERISA the year was 1974. And 93406 was the number. So the difference between the Public Law Act section and the U.S. Code section, are they the same? I see a head shaking no. I'll take that. So remember, if we scroll down to our favorite code, remember here's the code column, here's the Act Public Law section column. Scrolling down to, you know what, why do I don't need to scroll, I can control F. So 1144, so our section in the U.S. Code, 29 U.S. Code 1144, what was the public law section number that enacted 1144? It's on the screen, and I don't want to make it bigger because it'll jump all over the place. All right, I'll make it bigger then. That's, if you can't see, you just can't see. Okay, so far so good. Is that better? 514. Does everybody see that? 514 was in 29 USC 1144. So if you need to translate, if you get, remember we went in class and we had an example of a New York Times article about the Voting Rights Act, and it kept on referring to Section 2, Section 5, Section 2, Section 5. If we wanted to know what the Voting Rights Act Section 2 and 5 said today, we could go to Table 3 and get the translation. We'd have to get, where would we go to get the public law number of the Voting Rights Act? Popular name table. Think, when you get a question, think, okay, what information do I have? Voting Rights Act. That's a name. What exists that helps me with that? The popular name table. Popular name table will give me the public law number. I don't remember what it is for the Voting Rights Act, but if I looked up ERISA, I would find out it's 93406. And then you can go to the Table 3 tool, get the year, 1974, public law number, 93406. Look at the table and find out, okay, whatever the Voting Rights Act was, here's where I'll find it in the U.S. Code, and that's how I find what the current law is. Okay, makes sense? Okay, so one of the questions in the screencast, so is the U.S. Code updated any time a public law is amended? Now that question could be a little confusing because public laws don't really get amended. Remember, the Congress or the state legislature sits and they pass a law or an act or a chapter law here in New York. And that law or act or chapter law may amend a previous law, public law, chapter law that appears in the code. Actually, we didn't look at this today, I was going to save it. If you look to your walkthrough handout from the print, turn to page 13, and that actually is just the title page for, remember, McKinney's session laws, where we find our chapter laws. The laws chronologically arranged as they were passed by the Assembly and Senate and signed by the governor. And then page 14 is the beginning of Chapter 705. Remember, Chapter 705 in 1996 was the last time Section 4410 in the Public Health Law was amended. And then turn to page 15. This is where I'm hoping it will help explain what we're talking about in our review. Section 410 of the Public Health Law is amended by adding a new subdivision 4 to read as follows. So they amended by adding another section. So again, the chapter laws, the public laws on the federal end, amend prior laws, and then they appear in the code. So our question as it read, so is the U.S. Code updated anytime a public law is amended? I would change that word since we've now learned, since anytime a public law is enacted. So what would the answer be to my revised question? So is the U.S. Code updated anytime a public law is enacted? Do you not understand the question? No. Okay. So if when a new public law gets enacted, will the U.S. Code be changed? What will happen? Take a look. Let's move to New York so our situation is analogous. So when the New York legislature meets again in 2016, they will eventually pass some chapter laws. Will the contents of those chapter laws be reflected in the New York Code McKinney's? Yeah, I see some heads. The sections will come out of the chapters, say Chapter Law 1 of 2016, whatever it's about. Let's say it's about family law. It will get pulled out and it will probably get put in various places in the domestic relations law, except that maybe there's something to do with tax. So then it might get put in whatever the tax title is. I don't even know what the tax title is for McKinney's. Do any of you tax people know what the, no? Okay. It doesn't matter. Again, the sections get pulled out of the session laws, whether they're called chapter laws, whether they're called public laws, and they get put in the code. And then they might get changed by a subsequent chapter law or public law. Question?
How much is the difference in time between when it's enacted and when the USCA is updated? I know you said the USC is usually a year behind, so if it gets enacted, does it immediately get updated in the annotated code? Or does it take 6 months for Lexis and Westlaw to update it?
I mean, take a look at our session law example on page 15. The law, the chapter law itself says, hey, we're amending this section of the code. So it's just a function of time for Lexis and Westlaw to incorporate that in the code. I would imagine it's not very long. I don't really know the answer, a couple of weeks maybe. But if it isn't amended, if it isn't incorporated in the code, then you should see a red flag, enacted legislation, or red something or other on Shepard's that will tell you, look at this. The one thing you want to be aware of, enacted legislation may be effective at various dates. The legislature, Congress federal, the state legislature may say, okay, we're enacting this new piece of legislation, but it's not effective for 6 months. That's totally up to the legislature. Then you'll see a flag online, but it will give you some, you'll have to read carefully because, hey, we're lawyers, we have to read carefully. But it'll give you some signal to say, hey, this is effective in 6 months. So, again, bibliographic awareness, or at least just reading carefully. Here's a good question. Since the U.S. Code is the most up-to-date source and law currently in force, okay, someone got that from the screencast, excellent. Should we refer to the U.S. Code instead of the statutes at large, or should we cross-reference the information in both? The answer is it depends on what you want. If you want to know what the current law is, check the U.S. Code, check McKinney's. Don't bother with statutes at large. If you need to go back to see what the law said when it was originally enacted, that's a different story. Now the question, I would like to learn if there's a difference between statutes at large and, ooh, somebody wrote it out. Cool, United States Code, Congressional Administrative News. NewsScan. The answer is yes, there is a difference, but only with respect to legislative history, which we will talk about in 2 weeks. So with regard to public laws, same thing. Statutes at large, USCAN. I believe the only difference is, well, I know the statutes at large is official and USCAN is unofficial. I believe that you probably have to cite to statutes at large for Blue Book rules, but don't quote me on that because I am not a Blue Book expert. When searching a code section in Lexis, and this will be true also for Westlaw, there's usually a history and under that relevant cases. So we're talking about notes of decisions. How are these notes of decisions chosen? Are they leading cases? And is this the same as you would see in the USCA book? So actually this person is asking the difference between notes of decisions in Lexis and Westlaw. Good question. You have no way of knowing that. The answer is the cases can be different. Obviously, some of the cases will be the same because those are just the cases interpreting that section. The way they used to bill themselves as different, the USCA, which is on Westlaw, gave you every single case that interpreted your section. Lexis sold their product, the USCS, as cases that were the most important. So in theory, you'd have fewer cases on Lexis for Westlaw. I can tell you I have not gone through and made an analysis of any section to determine if that's true, but that was what was told. So the cases, what you should know is that the cases can be a little bit different. And the way I just explained how the cases are chosen, it's more than just the leading cases. But as I said, Lexis, really the USCS publishers, even before Lexis owned it, billed themselves as being more selective in the idea of saving lawyers time from not reading totally not so important cases. Actually, we already talked about the last question that I have here from the screencast. How frequently is the U.S. Code updated on Hein Online? As I said, pretty much with the U.S. Code. It appears on when the U.S. Code gets published. And again, I'm talking about the official U.S. Code. Let's just see if I probably don't have Hein Online up here anymore. Pretty much, Hein Online gets updated pretty much about the same time as the U.S. Code. So, yeah, I figured it logged me out. That's okay. We'll take a quick look. And the only time I would go to the U.S. Code on Hein Online, on FedSys, anywhere, is when I need to see the law from a prior year. I need to see the current law. I'm not going to the U.S. Code. I'm going to USCA, USCS. Hopefully on Lexis or Westlaw, if not in print. But if I do need to see a law from a prior year, again, perhaps if I have a question where the controlling law is from a prior year. So what I'm doing, because remember the U.S. Code is published in that funky way where the permanent edition comes out every 6 years and then there are supplements for the 5 years in between. So I've gone to the 2012 edition because that's obviously the most recent in the 6-year cycle. And then I'm scrolling down to the end, even past the indexes, to see that the most up-to-date is actually through January 2015, which is essentially what we have in print. But I won't be using that a whole lot, as I mentioned. Okay, so in review, in terms of finding relevant statutes, of all the things we've talked about today and last week, what would you say is the best way to find a relevant statute? Okay. How?
Because you said it's your best friend.
It is your best friend, absolutely. So what would you do in the annotated code?
Would you
Go online, go to the library, Google. Somebody help him on out. He was brave and dove in with the first answer. Yeah. Okay, you use LexisNexis. Okay, good.
And then I annotated code, New York.
Yeah, annotated code. What about a keyword search? Guys who love Google, what about, it's not Google, it's Lexis, but remember? Now, this is just one possibility of keywords, obviously on our particular issue. But I was suggesting to you a little while ago, keyword search is okay, but especially when you're searching statutes because of that controlled vocabulary, it may or may not be your best shot when you don't know anything about an area. So if you don't know anything about an area, you don't even know if there is a statute, what might you do? Or other types of encyclopedias, secondary sources, all of the above. Hey, remember, secondary sources. Even if you know it's a statutory area, like we know at least on the federal end, we knew our HMO liability question was, we didn't know if there was a New York statute or not. What gave us a great start? New York juror. So again, I would say, as much as our annotated code is our best friend, I'm only going to start there when I know for sure there's a statute, or I actually know what the statute is, like we knew ERISA, where I'm really going to start at secondary sources. Find out if there's a statute, find out what it is, even if I'm pretty sure there is a statute. Like I was telling you about the reference question I had about child models. I knew there was a statute. Secondary sources would be one place, actually the index, my best friend annotated code, was another. So depends on the circumstance. So I would say Aman is pretty much right, and secondary sources is the other option, again, depending on what you know, and even when you might not even start in the best spot. That's the problem with research. You never know what the best way to go is until you've already done it. But there again, that's why you have a toolbox. Okay, so finding a relevant statute. Secondary sources, keyword search. If we know the name, we know it's Civil Rights Act or Voting Rights Act or Lemon Law or UCC, where might we go? Index, or we know the name, popular name, okay? And when we finally get into our friend the annotated code, and we find a section like 4410 of the Public Health Law or 1144 of Title 29, what are we definitely going to look at? We already know the section. Table 3 would get us back and forth between the U.S. Code section and the Public Law section. We're already in the code. We will, to interpret, absolutely, table of contents. All of the above. All of the above. Actually, in fairness, you all answered in a perfectly correct order because I didn't specify, which actually turned out to be a good thing because you all actually filled in why the annotated code is our best friend, which was my next question. So you're reading my mind. That's pretty impressive. When looking at the table of contents, I will be more specific, however. What's the one type of section we're going to look for, in addition to other relevant sections? But we're always going to look at a particular section if they have it. Definitions. We'll look at the pocket part if we're in print, But when looking at the table of contents of the different sections, if there's a definition section, we want to look at that, because if they're defining our terms in our statute, we kind of need to know what they mean. Okay. And we already talked about making sure how current it is. We need to know when Lexis and Westlaw updated it. We're going to check Keysight and Shepherd's just to make sure whatever pending legislation there might be, if there are any cases that might have declared it unconstitutional, and that's all going to be actually taking me longer to say it than it will for you to do it. I'm just going to pick a random section here. And again, remember, when we're in statutes and codes, good old Lexis, we have to narrow to codes. Oh, let's see what New Jersey looks like, just for something different. So I actually don't see anything up here, so I know we're good. I can Shepherdize for more information. Just by way of review on Shepherd's for statutes, and then we'll review quickly for Westlaw if the computer lets me do it quickly. So again, pending legislation, so I'm not going to worry if that said enacted. And Shepherd has all these funky symbols. Usually if you highlight it, it will tell you what it means. But again, we don't need to worry about pending. And here on Westlaw, we'll have to go back here. And again, the flag, proposed legislation. And again, just remember, if you are trying to find a state law, if they use named codes, like in New York, we have the public health law, use the word law. California, those of you who looked at California, they also had named codes. Those of you who looked at New Jersey, you could type in just that funky number, 26A:4B-13 or whatever the numbers were. So again, just the updating of Shepherd's and Keysight for our statutes. Any questions? So I'm going to pass out assignment 2 on statutes. Pass around the pile on either side. The assignment itself is not yet up on Twin. It will be by the end of this evening, if not before. Actually, it will be within the next 2 hours. How about that? But what I'd like to do is go over a little bit more, just so that hopefully you understand what I'm looking for. Again, do not hesitate to ask. All the questions that you all, some of you anyway, came by were all great. And as you saw, I posted some of them up on Twin. I will continue to do that for this assignment. You will continue to use our same fact pattern. Question in Roman numeral 1, has it made it around yet? Everybody have? So question Roman numeral 1, I'm asking you to look back at your assignment 1 and tell me what you found with regard to statutory section. Question in Roman numeral 2, we're starting with New York statutory codes. So I'm asking you to look in all 3 services. And I strongly suggest, as it says in the hint here, answer all the questions 1 through 9 for Bloomberg, then answer 1 through 9 for Lexis, then for Westlaw. Obviously, you don't have to do the services in that order, but answer all the questions for each service. Yeah.
So for, you say 1 through 6, doing all 3, then number 7, it says use either Lexis or Westlaw. So then does that mean not Bloomberg? Or
yes, you anticipated, but it's actually I misspoke. It's answer questions 1 through 6 for all 3. In each question, read carefully because there will be a couple where I say not Bloomberg. You just can't do it on Bloomberg. So, for instance, as Denise, you pointed out, for questions 7 and 8, use either Lexis or Westlaw. So you only have to do it once. I'm trying to make it a little easier for you. Just tell me what you did. And then question 9, I do want you to compare all 3. Part B of Roman numeral 2, Part B of Roman numeral 2. I'm going to ask you to go to print. So you can go to either McKinney's or CLS. Those are both in the reading room in the library. If you need help finding it, just ask somebody at the reference desk or circulation desk. See if you can kind of pretend you don't already know the answer, but since you've been searching on 3 systems online, you probably already have a good sense. But do your best. So question number 3, I ask you to list any useful secondary sources, and then I want you to go back online to see if you see the equivalent in online. So if you're using CLS, which is one of the 2 New York codes, you'll want to go to Lexis Advance. If you're using McKinney's, which is the other New York code, you'll want to go to Westlaw, again, because Lexis publishes CLS and West publishes McKinney's. Again, I ask you to choose the best section. Look for the table of contents. That might be a little tricky, as we discovered in California. It was very tricky. It's actually better, honestly, in New York. We did it with the walkthrough today, where you just see the article up top and you flip back to the beginning. And with any of this, don't struggle. If you need, give it a try. If you need help, ask me, ask the reference librarian. The only thing the reference librarian won't be able to help you with are your questions of, do you want, what do you mean by? Because obviously I've written the questions, they're not going to know what that is, what the answers are. So in part B6, I ask you to compare and evaluate print and statutory searching. So we've been talking a little bit about how to think about comparing. I ask you in Part C, are your results for the code sections you found in secondary sources listed in Part 1? So remember, you're going back to Assignment 1. You're going to tell me what you found in terms of statutory sections. And then I ask you to explain why or why not. So briefly explain. So look at what you found for statutory sections in Assignment 1 that you just handed in. And basically, I want more than are your results listed. So you can say yes or no. I want more than yes or no. Just say they're useful because, or they're not useful, or I didn't find anything. Because some of you may not have found much, so just explain that. And then I ask you what you found for question Roman numeral 1. Compare that to what you find in question Roman numeral 2. Page 3. Any questions? Stop me if you've got questions. Okay, so in Roman numeral 3, we're going to look at federal statutory codes. I'm asking you to look at Bloomberg for sure, and then you can choose either Lexis or Westlaw. Choose your least favorite so you get experience with the one you don't use as much. Don't do both, because just tell me what you're using. Okay, going through all the things we've talked about in questions 1 through 4. Question 5, again, we talked about this. Whatever section you choose is your best section. Tell me when your section was first enacted. Some federal laws that were first enacted long time ago, probably before the 1960s, were not referred to as public laws. They were referred to as chapters. So if that's what your section is, look for the C or the CH or the word chapter. You won't see PL. Again, if you get confused, that's okay. Come ask. Okay, the rest of these questions. Question 7, find a case from one of your sections for each service. So by that you're looking at Bloomberg and you're looking at either Westlaw or Lexis. So cite a case from one of your sections for each of those. Cite the best case you find with minimal analysis. Again, don't spend your time reading the case. Just take a quick look at the summary. If it looks close enough, that's fine. I know that's not what you should do as lawyers, so. Okay, so as I mentioned already, question B, try searching the U.S. Code on a free website. Tell me which one you used. Remember, on the TWEN page, we have the links in the class web links in the statutes folder. So I'm already in the statutes folder here on the screen, just so you see. So here's the class web links. Here are all the links, and you will see the statutes folder. So just go into that, or you can Google. But if you're having trouble finding it or remembering the name to Google, then that's where you should go. Ask you what your search is, what the best section you found. Again, don't spend a whole lot of time. And then talk just a little bit about when you might want to use the web or Bloomberg for statutory research. And then I ask you once again to compare your results. You found for federal statutes in your secondary sources in Part 1 with what you find in Part 3. And then, as you had in this last assignment that you just turned in, describe a good research strategy for researching and utilizing annotated codes. Again, if you're not sure what it is, any questions? Okey-doke. I will not see, well, I will see you next week probably in the library, but I will not see you next week up here. Wait, we're not done. I know, don't worry, 2 more minutes, but an important 2 minutes. I will not see you up here next week because next Tuesday is a Monday for all of you for class. So I will see you up here in 2 weeks. However, why I'm making you stay is that I have figured out dates for the exam. I don't cut everybody's. And the exam will be either Thursday, May 5th or Friday, May 6th. I know at least one of you has a conflict. I will speak with Dean Casper and ask him not to schedule conflicts on either of those days. I know at least one of you, if you haven't spoken to me and you do have an other conflict, let me know. I know a couple of you do have an exam on one of those days, but you shouldn't, according to what you sent me, shouldn't have an exam on the other.
So this is the 5th and the 6th?
The 5th and the 6th, that's Thursday and Friday of that week. And beyond the date, don't worry about the exam quite yet. As I mentioned in our first class, we will spend half of a class, so an hour and a half, if needed, reviewing the exam. Any questions about dates, statutes?
We get to pick a date or something like that?
Oh, okay. Of the 4th and the 5th, you get
4th and the 5th, I thought it was 5th.
Oh, I'm sorry, 5th and 6th. It's been a long day, sorry. Of that Thursday and Friday, 5th and the 6th. You get to choose. Don't tell me your choice, because the exam is anonymous. So if you have both of those days free, you just will show up at 9 o'clock on whichever day you choose and take the exam.